Hey guys, so I'm gonna at long last show you guys some photos of the weaver bird. I know I've been promising it. Let's just get rid of that echo and then we're good to go. Um, I think I just need to set share screen. Sorry about that. Entire screen, there we go. Don't need audio. So these are some photos I've taken of the weaver bird. Right, Jimmy? Just sit back. And I know I've been teasing you guys that I was going to do this, but at long last, here are a couple of images. So he's there he's obviously been pruning himself, or not pruning, preening himself, and also squawking and doing his little song and dance as well. Just look at how vivid those colors are. Look how vivid that yellow is, almost blinding, right? There's actually a hibiscus in my garden that is flowering right now. Same kind of very bright yellow. I wonder if I can show you guys that very quickly. Um, I'm doing the thing that I was saying the prosecutor shouldn't do, a dead air. Anyway, so it's this flower here, right? The same vivid yellow. See, okay, so what else can I show you guys? Let's get rid of that. Okay, got a couple more photos of the same bird. Again, look how bright and warm and vivid that yellow is. Couldn't be any brighter, right? This is the same bird on a rainy day. Still pretty bright for gray skies. Have I shown you guys these pictures? Thanks a lot, Chelsea. Okay, anything else? This is him in mid-acrobatic mode. Have you guys seen these pictures? Have I shown any of these to you guys? Okay. So it's quite a job doing all of that weaving using your mouth while you've got to kind of perform a balancing act, right? Do I have another one? Yeri is inside the nest. So also important to keep track in the middle of weaving. You know what in other words, being able to see the woods for the trees in the middle of weaving, right? Did I post it on YouTube? Okay. Well, there are a couple of them. Okay, Timmy, I'm going to put you down. Okay, so today we're going to deal with just the month of February, which is the lead up to Paris. It's by the end of February, Vincent is in Paris. You may remember that he sort of signed up to go to an academy. You may also remember that he was sort of complaining about not feeling so well, but also hinting that he might see his brother in Paris. Well, that's about to all come to fruition. Something else I want to share on the Team Peachtree channel is I found a huge spider in my bedroom. I actually found another even bigger spider downstairs yesterday. If there's one thing scarier than finding a spider in your home, it is finding it and then losing it. Like it scuttles away somewhere and then you don't actually know where it is. But I did actually record some footage of catching the spider in the bedroom, and so catch and release. So I'll be putting that on this channel quite soon. I don't love spiders. I acknowledge they have a place in this world. And I don't particularly love catching really big, scary spiders either, but I think it is preferable than, squishing them or whatever. Yeah, no, there's another video, it's a little bit longer than that one, where I show the catch and release. So anyway, let's get going with the Van Gogh letters. And let's just do that. And I think, Timmy, I'm going to put you down. I think you must go and lie in my bed. Okay. Right, so if we just go back a letter or two, you can see him talking about Paris, is dropping hints. I'm tremendously busy, going to painting class. If we go back another letter, he talks about I'm at the academy. The best thing would be to stay here a long time. It sort of talks quite a lot about money as well. Yeah, so that I think you guys know where we are. So we're now going to resume with the 3rd of February. Okay, guys, ready? It's called a rain spider. It's also known as I think it's called a hunting spider. They tend to come out when it rains, and it has been raining. Okay. So 3rd February, let's do this. I'll let me share this with you guys. So if you want to follow on your screen. Dear Thea, I already wrote to you the day before yesterday that although on the one hand I felt far from well, I nevertheless began to see some light. I do want to talk to you guys a little bit about light in this episode. Have you guys ever bought light yourself? Lights, like have you ever gone out and bought the lights for your home, for example? I'd be interested to hear if you have. Did I send that to me? Okay, just give me a second. I just want to send, I thought I did send this. Anyone here installed light in their homes before? I don't mean like one light. I mean like done a kind of a whole makeover of your lounge, your bedroom, that sort of thing. Anyone done that? So what I want to show you, this may be news to some of you, may not be news to some of you. Can you see on screen, it shows color, temperature, and a kind of a code or a lighting code. Code's not really the right word. Map, I guess, lighting map. And so it's showing that it's exactly the same bulb here, but this bulb appears more of a golden color, and this one appears more of a blue-white color, right? And so if you're installing light at home, you kind of got to preferably have, okay, come. If you're installing lights at home, you preferably want the light not to be like a cold white color. tastes differ, but you probably don't want like a cold, how can I put it? Almost a blue-white color. You don't really want that color in certain rooms. And then in other rooms, you might want that color perhaps for reading or whatever it is. But it is quite interesting that you don't just have a light bulb and it's just one color. You actually get, I think they call it daylight, warm light, and it's not cold light, but it's basically like a very well, it is a cold white light. So you kind of get three different shades of light from a bulb, and you can decide, how you want the mood of your lounge. So anyway, I did a little bit of work changing the vibe of my lounge, and I found that the light was too cold. So I actually had to go back to the shop and change the light color. And so you can actually think about that in terms of yourself. Are you giving out a warm light in terms of who you are and how you are? Or, I mean, you may be giving out light, you might be telling the truth, you might be, um, you know, um, sending something out into the world that is essentially good, but is it the right kind of light, right? Something just to think about. We just had that with the prosecutor in the Murdoch case. You may be saying all the right things, but are you saying it in the right way? And one can also ask that of Van Gogh. I want to quickly share with you guys this picture. Did you know that that prosecutor actually uh, put up a picture of the Mona Lisa and then tore off a piece of it? Can you guys see that? He actually, in the courtroom today, he had a picture of the Mona Lisa and then he tore off a piece and he said, that's reasonable doubt. But if you can still see what remains is the Mona Lisa, well, then something is whatever it is beyond a reasonable doubt. Quite interesting. Quite interesting. Okay, so let's go back to that letter. Just on the topic of light. So you can see behind me in the sort of background image, that's quite a warm light. That sort of gives out a sort of yellow light like of the weaver bird. But you get lights that are very, very white. So anyway, he goes on to say, I'm sorry to have to tell you more categorically that I'm literally worn out and overworked. So with a month to go before he goes to Paris, he's saying something he doesn't normally say. He's saying, I'm tired, I'm worn out, I'm exhausted. Just think, I went to live in my own studio in Newnan on May 1st, and I've not had a hot dinner more than perhaps 6 or 7 times since. That's quite a statement to make. So it's now February, it's almost a year later, and he's kind of saying, I've had 6 or 7 hot dinners in almost a year. So he basically has maybe one hot dinner every 2 months. So can you see, this is a tough hombre. He's an artist that is used to going without. He's a really tough guy. And so this idea again, when he's in Auvergne-sur-Oise, that he's going to crumble at the first news that his brother might be struggling financially, just is simply not true, right? Simply not true. Do you guys agree that that might make a good title for this episode instead of Prelude to Paris? Okay. Kristen says, I feel bad for him. Terry Dean, good to see you here. Okay, I'll try and do the ASMR thing. I'll try and soothe you with my voice. Anyway, he says, I do not want you to tell mother that I'm not well for good reasons, for perhaps she would begin to worry, thinking that it was not kind to let things happen as they did, namely that I did not stay at home to avoid these very consequences. Now, can you see it's a kind of a Gabby Petito situation. He's left home. He's out having his adventure, and things aren't really going terribly well. And he's saying, "Don't tell mom. Don't tell my family." He's asking Theo to keep a secret. Don't you think he may have asked for the same thing with the year incident and even with the suicide incident, so-called suicide? Anyway, what you have here is a precedent for the one brother asking the other brother not to reveal his real situation. He says, "I will not mention it, so you don't either." And those are the exact same words he says to Gogh. After the ear incident, he said, "I won't talk about this, you don't have to either." Anyway, he says, "I've lived then and I do here without any money for a dinner because the work costs me too much. And I've relied too much on my being strong enough to stand it." So he is aware of his own resilience, but he's now worn through it, right? So you can't say that he's not self-aware. You can't say that he gets himself into situations and that he doesn't know his own heart and his own capacity. He does. He realizes his strength is sort of flickering to some extent because he's been working too hard. He's even been to a doctor. What the doctor tells me is that I absolutely must take better care of myself, and until I feel stronger, I must take more rest. It is an absolute breakdown. So he's saying he's feeling broken down. Now I've made it worse by smoking a great deal, which I did the more because then one does not feel an empty stomach so much. So here you get a sense of how Van Gogh deals with struggle, right? How he actually deals with not deficit. What's a D word that means not having enough? Deprivation, right? Well, manager de la share enragé, I don't know what that is. That is what I have my share of. Yeah, sorry, not manager. I don't actually know what that means. Does anyone? It means to go through hard times. Okay, that's what that means. To go through a very rough time, to have trouble making ends meet. So it's a French expression, manger de la vache enragée, I guess. If Bria was here, she could kind of counsel us on how to actually say that. Yeah, it was a great analogy, right? Okay. He says, "For it is not just the food, at the same time, it is all the worry and trouble one has. You know how, for various reasons, the time in Newnan was far from easy for me. Then I came here, and I'm very glad I did, but it has also been a difficult time." So, again, just saying the obvious, he's used to struggle, he's used to having a difficult time. If he has a difficult time, he writes a letter and he says he's having a difficult time. Why didn't he do that just before he died? If he was so depressed, why did he forget to say that? What we must do, and where the greatest trouble lies, is this: to pay the models oneself is too great a burden. As long as one hasn't enough money, one must use the opportunities offered by the studios like those of Verlat or Corman. And one must live in the artist world and work at the clubs where one shares the cost of the models. So you can actually see that what's actually really going on here is the thing that is costing him the most money are girls, right? That's actually the root of his food deprivation. He's getting, I guess, what he needs in another sense and losing it in terms of food. Okay. He says, if it could be arranged so that we lived in the same city, another hint, it would certainly be by far the best, at least for a time. So what he's realizing is, I've got certain appetites. I've got certain, like I'm on a mission in terms of my art, and then money's kind of being a bit of a difficulty. And so he's trying to solve the problem of how can I get girls and paint and sort of survive, right? And is starting to figure out, what's going to work is if I just move in with Theo, then that solves the accommodation issue, and then I can get all of the rest that I need, rest of the things that I want, kind of thing, right? So he says, but the more I think about it, the more certain I am that it would perhaps be better not to spend too much on a studio the first year, because that first year I shall mainly have to draw. For speaking of Corman, I think he should tell me much the same thing as Verlat, namely that I must draw from the nude or plaster cast for a year, just because I've always been drawing from life. So he's kind of saying, for the next year, I really need to draw naked people. He says, that is not asking too much, for I tell you that there are some fellows here who've been plodding at it for 3 years and are not yet allowed to give it up. So he's kind of saying to his brother, I may need to plod along for quite a while still. You sort of hear him saying, I think any minute now I'm going to sell a picture, and then he's back to the plodding narrative, right? He says, in that 1 year, I must drill myself in the man's and woman's figure, both in detail and as a whole, and then I shall know it almost by heart. Drawing in itself, the technique of it comes easily enough to me. I'm beginning to do it like writing with the same ease. So can you see he's actually saying that he's a good writer and he's starting to draw as well as he writes. Quite an interesting, quite interesting that he's aware of that. But at that very point, it gets more interesting if one is not satisfied with the skill gradually acquired, but aims seriously and thoroughly at originality and broadness of conception, the drawing of the mass instead of the outlines, the solid modeling. And when people like Verlat or Corman, for instance, demand this of a fellow, I assure you it is no bad sign, for there are plenty of those whom Verlat simply lets drudge on. Again, he talks about Paris. He says, I feel for myself that I must insist on devoting at least a year in Paris to drawing from the nude and from plaster casts. For the rest, let me do what presents itself in the way of painting. Do not think this is a long way, for it is a short one. One who can draw a figure from memory is much more productive than one who cannot. And you will see how productive I shall become by taking the trouble to draw for a whole year. Neither must you suppose, so he's kind of making a legal argument or an argument in favor of himself, providing the evidence, providing the rationale. Neither must you suppose that those years of drawing out of doors have been wasted, for that is just a thing that those who have worked only at academies and studios lack, the power to see the reality in which they live and the ability to find subjects. It's quite interesting that he's saying that these people in these art schools lack the power to see reality. Well, wouldn't it be wise to postpone renting a studio, at least for the first half year, just because we need the money so badly? We need the money so badly. But for the rest, I'm very sympathetic to founding a studio, and bear in mind, 2 years from now, or about 2 years from now, he would go to the south to found a studio. So he's not just speculating here. He is going to do this. But Theo, this indisposition is a damn bad thing just now. Regret it terribly, but yet I keep courage, right? So there again and again and again, he confirms that when things are when he's in a pickle, when he's struggling, he keeps his courage. He remains strong and resilient. He remains optimistic. He says it'll right itself. You understand that if I had put off doing something about it, it would have become worse and worse. But my opinion is that one must not think that people whose health is impaired, wholly or partly, are no good for painting. So, can you see when his health is impaired, he says so, he communicates it. It's quite matter of fact. He says it is necessary to reach the 60s or at least the 50s if one begins at 30. But one need not be perfectly healthy. One may have all kinds of ailments. The work need not suffer from it. On the contrary, nervous people are more sensitive and refined. But Theo, just because my health is decidedly impaired, I'm resolved to apply myself to the higher figure and to try to refine myself. It overtook me so unexpectedly. I'd been feeling weak and feverish, but I went on anyway. But I began to feel worried when more and more of my teeth broke off and I began to look more and more sick. That says a lot, right? Is teeth breaking off. Now, I think you've got to at least consider the possibility, is he being a hypochondriac here? Is he exaggerating so that he can get where he wants to go, which is Paris? What do you think? Well, we're going to need to go through quite a few more letters to get a deeper sense of that. Fiona says, what disease does he have? It's not clear that he has any disease besides being overworked, but it is possible that he does have a specific disease. He certainly has been running around prostitutes quite a lot. So it is possible that he may have syphilis at this point already. He says, I think having my teeth attended to will already help because my whole mouth being painful, I swallowed my food as quickly as possible, and it may help to improve my looks also. As to this month, I paid for my room in advance, 25 francs for food, 30 francs also in advance, and 50 francs to the dentist. Then a visit. Wow. So he's just spent a lot of money, twice as much as his rent on a dentist. Then a visit to the doctor and some drawing materials. There now remains 6 francs. So once again, he doesn't have any money. The main thing will be not to fall ill this month, which is not easy to achieve. It certainly might happen. I always believe that I have a certain toughness in common with the peasants. That's also something you don't hear the experts saying, is that, you know, if you had to ask Van Gogh, are you a tough guy, right? Are you someone that can handle hardship? He would say yes. Yeri says it. I do have a certain toughness in common with the peasants. Mel says it could also just be a sign of a poor diet. Okay, it could be both, poor diet and syphilis. He says, but don't you worry about it. If you can send some more money, very well. But if you can't, I'll await events in all calmness. What I do not like is that I'm feverish, right? And I argue in this way, I may have become weak, but I've been as careful as I could not to take unwholesome food. Neither is the overexertion too great, because notwithstanding everything, I keep up my spirit. So it is only that I'm overstrained because I'm weak. I think it will redress itself. But you understand, if it got worse and took a vicious turn, it might develop into malignant typhus, or at least typhoid fever. That's what he thinks. That's his self-diagnosis. He thinks he's got typhoid. The only reason why I do not suppose this will happen in the first place is, that I've had a great deal of fresh air. In the second place, I repeat, though I obviously haven't had enough nourishment, I have been careful to take very simple food instead of the rotten things in the cheap restaurants. And thirdly, I have a certain calmness and serenity. So he's actually saying that despite so much struggle, despite suffering, he has been able to remain calm and serene. That means he's particularly mentally tough, doesn't it? So he says, let's wait and see how things turn out. Don't worry about it. I don't either. Suppose I got a fever, I've lived and nourished myself so simply that it is improbable that it should become so very malignant. After all, things don't just happen, and there's a reason for everything. So in a way, here he's minimizing his health challenges, which I think was maybe a mistake. Do write soon. I feel I badly need to hear from you. As to going to Noonan, I should like to know what you think best. Again, he's sort of asking his brother for some input. But it is not necessary for me to go. For somebody like Raker, the gardener, can do the necessary packing or dispatching just as well. But if you think it would be better, I can be ready by March. So he's saying, if you think I should go home, let me know. So it'll be interesting to hear what Theo says. Does his brother think he should go home? Early February. Dear Theo, thanks for your letter and the enclosure. What pleases me so much is that now What pleases me so much is that now you yourself proposed the plan of going to Corman's. Let me tell you how things have been going on here. The painting course ended last week because at the end of the course, a competition is held for those who have gone through the whole course, among whom I do not belong. Oh, that's quite interesting. You may remember in the previous letter he said that the course ends, I think, at the end of March, doesn't it? Anyway, so one's also got to wonder, is that definitely true, what he's saying? I'm also drawing in the daytime now, and the teacher there who makes portraits at present and gets well paid for them has asked me repeatedly if I had never drawn from plaster casts before and if I taught myself to draw, and he concluded, I see that you have worked a lot and it will not take you long to make progress. You will gain much by it. It will take a year, but what does that matter? Okay, now there's one fellow of my age sitting next to me to whom he does not say that, and he has also painted a long time, and he has been drawing from plaster casts for 3 years. As a rule, they draw there without background, and especially the man in question is absolutely forbidden to do it. This makes awfully dry drawings. Fiona says he should just eat fruit and vegetables. Not quite sure how expensive that sort of thing is. Okay, then he says, now Sibit, that is the name of the teacher who also directs the class for drawing from the nude, said, as for you, you will draw as you please, for I see that you take drawing seriously. As for the others, I generally don't allow them to draw a background, for then they botch the drawing on the forms, whereas they are obliged to do them on a white background. So it is a straitjacket. Then he also said that Verlat had told him there was some good in my work, which Verlat did not say to me. Just after the receipt of your letter, it happened that Sibert came to look at the drawings. He painted the head of Niobe and a hand that might be done by Michelangelo. I had drawn that hand within a few hours, and that was the drawing he liked best. So now we're kind of getting Van Gogh assessing himself to his brother, apparently on the basis of what his art teachers think or have said. You may do as you like. I advise you to stay with us. This is almost a handsome promise, as if they guarantee success. And what shall I do? On the other hand, I've become better acquainted with those English fellows who have been in Paris, and I've heard their experiences. One was at Jerome's and one at Cabanel's. They say that one is relatively freer in Paris, and for instance, one can choose one's subjects more freely than one can here, but that the correction is not worth much. Do you know what I think? in Paris, I should certainly work more than here. For instance, a drawing a day or every 2 days. So have a look at these 3 paragraphs. Paris, Paris, Paris. You think he's thinking about Paris? And we know, or rather you know, enough clever fellows who would not refuse to look them over and give some hints. So in fact, we are at all events on the right track, whether I stay here some time or come to you. So Yeri's becoming quite explicit about it. I might actually come to you. It doesn't really matter if I come to you or if I stay where I am. The bottom line is we are on the right track. Quite clever language there. We are on the right track. Not I'm on the right track or you are on the right track. We are. We are in terms of my art journey. For the rest, Cormans would probably say the same thing. Just because I now have the opportunity to talk to several people about my drawings, I see my mistakes. That is half the battle. That would also make a really good title. And I mean, that is such a true statement anyway. No, it wasn't built at that time. At all events, let's keep courage. But now you must write a little more and we must try to do things energetically. I hear they work for 4 hours in the morning at Cormans, and then in the evening one can go and work at the Louvre or at the École des Beaux-Arts or some other studio where drawing is done. Now he's actually talking about where he might do work in Paris. So you can see his thinking has kind of gone that way, right? As to the portraits, there will not be much time left for them. If I want to keep up all the other things regularly, it's the same here. But it has struck me forcibly that there are still other things that I absolutely must change. When I compare myself to the other fellows, there's something stiff and awkward about me, as if I'd been in prison for 10 years. Again, he's not incapable of having unflattering insight about himself, and he's getting these insights in the context of being around other artists. It's good for him to juxtapose himself and juxtapose his art with other artists, with the work of other artists. Yes, Theo is his brother. And the cause of this is that for about 10 years I've had a difficult and harassed life, much care and sorrow and no friends, right? But that will change as my work gets better and I shall know something and be able to do something. Now, I think you could, if you want to put your true crime hat on for a moment and say, how can Van Gogh go through life without any friends and not become a Coburger and not become a Brian Laundrie, right? And the answer is because he's got a sense of himself. Even though he doesn't have any money, even though he doesn't have much status, even though he is seen as like the dregs of humanity by his fellow man, none of that matters to him because he's self-motivated. He's got a sense of who he is. He's got a sense of purpose. And if you think about it, Brian didn't have a sense of purpose. Brian's sense of purpose was Gabby. Nothing really beyond that. What was Brian Koberger's sense of purpose? Think about it, like what was he really excited about? You kind of feel like saying getting laid, right? And that's the difference. He's got a strong sense of self. You could even say the same about Alex Murdaugh. What was missing? So if Van Gogh didn't have glue in the forms of friends, but Murdaugh did, then how did Murdaugh become unstuck? And the answer is that he, because he took so much drugs, he became unstuck from normal human relations and normal human dynamics. The glue that would normally hold him to family and friends was now holding him to drugs and money. Does that make sense? Anyway, he says, that will change as my work gets better. So I'll get friends, I will have a better life, and I shall know something and be able to do something. I repeat, we are on the right track to accomplishing this, but do not doubt it. The way to succeed is to keep courage and patience and to work on energetically. That has been his mantra for very long, and that is his mantra going into the 1880s, sorry, the 1888. That's also his mantra coming into Orvez in 1890. He knows how to succeed. Just keep working, stay positive. And that didn't change in the last 2 months of his life. He was working energetically. Why? Because he was keeping courage and he was being patient. And he thought sooner or later I'll have a breakthrough. It is a fact that I must change my outward appearance somewhat. Perhaps you will say that this has got nothing to do with art, but on the other hand, perhaps you will agree with me that I'm having my teeth seen to. For instance, there are no less than 10 teeth that I've either lost or may lose, and that is too many and too troublesome. It makes me look over 40, which is not to my advantage. 10 teeth. That's also a possible title for this video. It really illustrates the seriousness of his struggle, the seriousness of what he's going through, doesn't it? I'm so tired. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep going for much more than about 15 minutes. I really want to get to Paris. I'm really trying to get to Paris. So I've decided to have that taken care of as well. It will cost me 100 francs. So in that time, going to the dentist, extremely expensive, but it can be done better now while I'm drawing than at any other time. And I have had the bad teeth cut off and have just paid half the money in advance. Now, do you notice when Van Gogh sits for a self-portrait, you don't see him smiling? I don't know if you really see very many people in self-portrait smiling, but if he did smile, one wonders what you would see. One wonders what you would see. Would you see something like this? Or this? What would you see? Okay. So a lot of this letter is about his teeth. He says, I thought my teeth were bad for another reason, and I didn't know that my stomach had deteriorated to such a degree. So it's also his stomach that's not doing well. It is stupid, if you will, but sometimes one has to choose between two evils and is trapped on both sides. During the last month, it began to trouble me a great deal. I began to cough continually too and to expectorate a greyish phlegm. So I began to get uneasy, but I will try to redress it. I don't know whether these are symptoms of syphilis, to be honest. I don't know. Is coughing a symptom of syphilis? I wouldn't be surprised. So the clinical presentation of pulmonary syphilis varies and includes cough and chest pain, but some patients have no respiratory symptoms. The first symptom of syphilis is typically a small sore where the bacteria entered your body. Does syphilis give you cold symptoms? Yeah, cold-like symptoms like sore throat and fever. So I do think he already has syphilis at this point. Why do you think that is? What do you think has brought that on? I just want to see if they talk about syphilis and teeth. Hutchinson teeth is a sign of congenital syphilis. That's something else. Can syphilis cause teeth problems? Dental defects are the most consistent clinical manifestation of syphilis and are pronounced in teeth which calcify in the first year of life as permanent incisions and first molars. There you have it. What STD causes tooth decay? So yeah, there are sores in the mouth, and I don't know if you remember him saying that his mouth hurts. That is a sign of syphilis. So some symptoms of syphilis: fever, that's what he said, sore throat, patchy hair loss, headaches, weight loss, muscle aches, fatigue. Okay. I don't know whether he's had it for a while. I think he has been going crazy since he left home, if you know what I mean. So there you have it. Dental defects are the most consistent clinical manifestation of syphilis and are pronounced in teeth. So before you kiss someone new, have a look at their mouths, have a look at their teeth. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So can you see we are quite on track with figuring Van Gogh out. We are not stumbling in the dark. We've got quite a good handle on who he is and what's really going on behind the scenes. He says, you see, I'm not stronger than other people in that if I neglected myself too much, it would be the same with me as with so many painters. So very many, if one thinks it over. I should drop dead or worse still become insane or an idiot. This is a fact, and the question is to steer a clear course between the various cliffs, and if one gets damaged, to try to keep the ship afloat. I know that Delacroix said he had learned the secret of painting when he had neither teeth nor breath left. That's quite a potent statement. But I also know that from that moment he took care of himself, and that except for his mistress, he would have died 10 or more years sooner. So can you see his sort of making excuses that, look, no matter what, I need to maintain access to girls or nudes or whatever. So do not be angry with me because of the expense. I shall try to economize, but things were getting too bad and I had to remedy them. So what do you get out of this whole thing is the fact that when Van Gogh is in trouble, he communicates that. He says, I'm not feeling well. And he goes into some detail. I've got trouble with my teeth. I've got trouble with my energy. I've got trouble with this. I've got trouble with that. And he plays open cards with his brother, right? And it's obvious why he's feeling the way he is, right? There's no mystery there. And so why on earth would he not, when he was in great despair in the final 2 months of his life, why wouldn't he communicate that? He's used to communicating his fluctuating feelings to his brother. When he's happy, he tells him. When he's unhealthy, he tells him. And when he's angry, he communicates that. He's expressive. You don't write 902 letters if you not someone who kind of tells it like it is. If you're not someone who is communicative. Okay. So I do think what's useful with these letters is you get a sense of, in a way, his self-inflicted suffering. I mean, the syphilis is because he's living fast and loose in a way. He's trying to be an artist and have some fun on the side. You can't really blame him, but yeah, that is a good point. That's also a good point. Thanks, Catherine. Okay. His mum is in the Netherlands, he's in Belgium, and he's about to head to France. Okay, let's continue. As to what you wrote about the folks at home, in this matter, I shall do what you think best. I'm free to leave here whenever I like, let's say in the first days of March, and that is when he did leave at the end of February. But just consider if the help I might be able to give would be worth the journey there and back. For I would also approve of staying here without going back, and from here straight to Corman, whenever you like. So, because his health has gone backwards, he's feeling himself a little bit like maybe Gabby Petito felt. He's feeling vulnerable. He's feeling like he's really at the mercy of his brother. Right? What his brother decides is actually going to decide what he's going to be doing. And so he's saying, you know what, the journey is quite expensive when I reckon that the luggage cost me more than my own fare. So let's think it over again. I keep feeling satisfied with having come here. Otherwise, I should have remained in a fix. And now, though there are still many difficulties, I see some chance of making progress. And by staying here somewhat longer or by going to Paris, he keeps referring to Paris, I shall get an even firmer hold. So he's saying, you know what, if I come to Paris, I'm going to be in a better position for me, which is good for you. As to the plan of possibly living together and taking a rather good studio where one can receive people if need be, keep it in mind, and let me keep it in mind too. So here they talk about living together. Now, I don't know whether his brother has written him a letter and said maybe we could live together. You know, maybe that option was actually mentioned by Theo and then Vincent jumped onto it. Anyway, he says, in the first place, I see that year of drawing from which I'm afraid there's no escape. If it isn't expensive and you find good quarters, then it would be all right. But if it is expensive, perhaps it would not be the cheapest way for the first year if we are rather hard up. So here he's talking about his brother's accommodation. The year of drawing is the critical point. After that, we are free to do other things, both portrait and landscape. I think we must put that first. There's no help for it. Didn't Delacroix and Corot and Millet keep thinking of the ancients and continue studying them? People who just study them in a hurry are, of course, quite wrong. The ancients certainly require great serenity, a knowledge of nature. They require tenderness and patience. Otherwise, they are no help. It is quite curious that Jericho and Delacroix both knew them more intimately than, for instance, David, and understood them better. They who were most strongly opposed to all academic routine. I do not yet know of Turgenev's books, but some time ago I read his biography, which is very interesting, and how he had in common with Daudet that passion for working from the model, blending 5 or 6 models into a single type. I do not know Ornay either, who I hear is very interesting too. More and more, I believe that I should work for work's sake. That is, after all, the principle of all great artists. Energy for energy. Okay. Well, that doesn't quite tell me. Anyway, That's the principle of all great artists, but in painting, one finds a certain rest in the histories of those painters who aimed at the most sublime through it all. Israel himself, for instance, was still quite unknown and poor, even to the extent of having nothing to eat but dry bread, when he nevertheless wanted to go to Paris. There it is again. Though the circumstances were discouraging enough. Not to be discouraged, even though one is almost starving, and though one feels one has to say farewell to all material comfort in life. So much for that. I wish you would write a little more now that we are discussing a change. So there you have it. They are discussing a change. A change is afoot. Founding a studio together would perhaps be a good thing, but we must feel sure that we can carry it through, and we must know our own minds perfectly. And once we begin it, we must have a certain confidence after all. Left us after a long series of lost illusions. Talks about the studio and wanting to be somebody, wanting to be active, so that when one dies, one can think, I go where all those who have dared something go. Well, we shall see. Well, let me ask you guys a question. Do you think Van Gogh is daring? Do you think right now, in terms of his life, he's quite daring? Do you think he's taking risks? Do you think he's in the adventure phase of his life? Bear in mind, he's just spent like the longest period of his entire life in Union. And do you think from there he is daring? What do you think? I agree. I think he is. He is trying to be brave. He is trying to be courageous. He is trying to live. He says, that impression I can't help getting of myself when comparing myself to others, namely that I look as if I'd been in prison for 10 years, is not exaggerated. Right? So again, he's aware that he doesn't look very good. And the poor prostitutes that he approaches, he looks like he's been in prison for 10 years. But he says, I want to change how I look. I must primarily not get too far out of the art world. And then all of this will disappear. So the other thing that I think is really important to stress is we know he went to see a doctor. He went to see a doctor, and it seems like the doctor thought, oh, maybe you've got typhoid. Well, he doesn't have typhoid. Remember that. Just trying to see where he says that. I think it's the previous letter. He says, where does he say I went to the doctor? Then a visit to the doctor, right? And then he talks about being feverish and the typhoid fever. So what this tells you is that the doctor clearly misdiagnosed all of this, right? And maybe Dr. Gachet did as well. Maybe the doctors in the asylum did as well. Bear in mind it's 1880 something. The doctors aren't what they are today. Now it was, how can I put this? It was well known, but they didn't really know how you picked it up. I just want to see if I can give you some background on that. Okay, let's just go to Wikipedia. So, I mean, they knew about syphilis as early as the late 15th century, right? in a sense. They called it the French disease. Syphilis, the word came out in 1530. Interesting that it's called the French disease, and Vincent's about to go to France. But can you see here, the first effective treatment only happened in 1910. The first person to give it the right name, or give it a name, was an Italian physician and poet, right? The way that it was contracted was only recognized in 1905. You can see how it took basically so they knew someone had a certain kind of illness, but it took them 5 centuries, essentially 4 centuries, to get somewhere with it. Compare that to what happened now with the pandemic. Just want to see what they say about the 1890s. Do they talk about it? They don't really talk about it. Anyway, I hope that does make it quite clear that it was still very misunderstood at this time, the 1880s. It was still very misunderstood. Vincent van Gogh is very unlucky because he got it just before they did understand it. If he was born 10 or 20 years later, he probably would have gotten it and gotten over it, right? Okay, so let's continue. What have I just done? First half of February, we've dealt with that one. Have we dealt with this one? I don't think we've done this letter. Yeah. Okay. Dear Theo, I received your letter and enclosed 25 francs. You didn't really send him a lot, did he? And thank you very much for both. I'm very glad that you are not opposed to my intention of coming to Paris. Okay. I didn't know that. So his brother said, he says, his brother didn't say, toothless brother, do not come to Paris. Don't come here and embarrass me. He says, well, I'm not against that idea. Then he says, I think it'll help me progress. And if I don't go, I'm afraid I should get into a mess and continue going in the same circle. Besides, I don't think that it would do you any harm to come home to a studio in the evening. Okay. Well, that would turn out not to be true because his brother, they would start arguing pretty early on. For the rest, I must say exactly the same about myself as you write about yourself. You will be disappointed in me. Quite an extraordinary thing to say. Yet the thing to do is combine, and the result may be much better understanding. Now, so just think about it. These brothers are writing dozens of letters, eventually hundreds of letters to one another, and now instead of writing letters, they can literally just talk to each other, right? And that is going to be what happens. And when that happens, we don't get the letters. We don't see the letters. We're about to go into the letterless phase where they are living together, and a lot of things happen, and we don't know exactly what did happen because they stopped writing, and then the letters resume. So that's something else we want to do, is get a sense of the tone between the two brothers and what's going on, and then on the other side of time when they come out, how long the letters are, how civil they are, what has changed in the prelude to Paris versus the aftermath to Paris, right? All important things to know. So now continues talking about his health. He says, I keep thinking there is a chance of avoiding a real illness, but it will take some time to restore my health. I have 2 more teeth that must be filled. Then my upper jaw, which was in the worst condition, will be all right. I have still to pay 10 francs on it, and then another 40 francs to have the lower jaw taken care of as well. Thus, some of those 10 years which I seem to have spent in prison will disappear. Because bad teeth, which one rarely sees nowadays when it is so easy to have them taken care of, give the face a somewhat sunken look. Well, that's for sure. The Dutch are quite well known for their bad teeth, right? And then even when taking the same food, one can digest it better when one can chew well, so my stomach will have a better chance to recover. But I can feel that I'm in a bad condition. Well, he's right about that. And as you write yourself, by neglecting it, it might become much worse. What you're also seeing here is how Van Gogh is able to take care of himself. He finds himself in a bad way and he recognizes that and he does something about it. He isn't just uh, ruin his teeth and someone must kind of drag him to the dentist like like a mother or something. He's able to take care of himself even when he's run down. So much more so, uh, at the end of his life, is he run down and how does he take care of himself, right? Okay. I've not worked for a few days. I went to bed early a few times, generally after drawing at the club. I feel that it does me good. I had a little note from mother saying that they will start packing in March. Not quite sure what that means. So he actually got a letter from his mother. They're kind of estranged at the moment, and so there's been a little bit of a message. Further, as you tell me that your lease is not up till the end of June, perhaps it might be better after all if I went back to Noonan in the beginning of March. But if I should have to meet with opposition and scenes like the ones before I left, he means at home, I should lose time there and then I should go somewhere else, if only for a few months, as I want to make some new things out of doors to take to Paris with me. Again, another reference to I want to go to Paris. That Siebert, the drawing class teacher who had first spoke to me in the way I wrote to you about, definitely picked a fight with me today. So he's arguing with his art teacher, perhaps to get rid of me, but he did not succeed because I told him, why do you pick a quarrel with me? I don't want to quarrel, and in any case, I don't desire the least bit to contradict you. Only you pick a quarrel with me on purpose. Apparently, he did not expect this, and just this once could not say much in answer. But next time, he can, of course, start a fight all right. So I think that's another reason why maybe skedaddles out of Belgium, because he was saying, maybe I should hang out here for a while. Well, now he's already arguing with his art teacher. What's behind it is that the fellows in the class are discussing my work and that I have said, not to Siebert, but outside the class to some of the fellows that their drawings were absolutely wrong. So yeah, yeah, you get a little bit of a sense of Van Gogh as a misfit, as socially awkward, as someone who struggles to get along with other people, who struggles to keep friends, right? I can tell you if I went to Corman and if sooner or later I got into trouble either with the teacher or the pupils, I should not mind it a bit. Even without a teacher, I might go through that course of drawing from the ancients. So you kind of get the sense that he's doing a Coburger. He's kind of telling his teachers and his fellow students that he knows best, that he's smarter than what they are. And ironically, he sort of is. I think in some ways he is. Of course, the proof of the pudding kind of thing, but his work isn't quite at that point yet, right? Yeah, that's right. So he says, if necessary, blah, 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 I should far prefer to have my work corrected as long as it does not become deliberate nagging. That correction without any other motive than a certain particular peculiarity in one's way of working, which is different from that of the others. If he begins again, I shall say aloud in the class, I'm quite willing to do all that you tell me to do mechanically, because if necessary, I particularly want to give you your due if you desire it. But as for mechanizing me as you mechanize the others, I assure you it will not influence me in the least. It's kind of saying, I'm not some kind of robot. Sorry, Stephanie. I'm not some kind of robot. I will decide how creative I want to be, which I kind of respect. I kind of respect that. Yeah. Yeah, he was pretty sure of himself. You can definitely credit Van Gogh for being quite confident as a person in a way. He's got a kind of an inner confidence. He talks about, I think Theo saying to him, go to work just as you like, work the way that feels right. And I don't know if we would have Van Gogh today I don't know if we would have this if Van Gogh didn't stand up to his art teachers. Can you imagine if his art teachers said, do this, and he did that? Would we ever have seen this sort of thing? Right? If he listened to his teachers, if he did as he was told, would you say that this artwork is the kind of artwork that comes about from listening to your own the universe that's pulsing in your own mind, or do you think that comes from what your art teacher told you to do, what your art teacher told you to think? It's because he can think for himself, because he's his own person, and also to some extent that Theo allowed him to do that he became this golden light, right? He could have become this cold white light artist, or a generic light bulb, just like everybody else, but he becomes this warm light for all mankind, right? Okay, so he says, the reason I draw from the plaster cast, I've not mastered it yet, but I feel it more and more, and I shall certainly carry it through. It is too interesting. I wish we could be together in the Louvre for a few days and talk it over. So you can see everything is coming to a head. It's not going to be like snap and he's in Paris. It's all predictably gathering momentum, right? He says, I think it would interest you. This morning I'm sending you Cherie, that's that book, especially because of the preface, which will certainly strike you. And I wish that we too might work together somewhere at the end of our lives, and looking back might say, firstly, we have done this, and secondly, that, and thirdly, that. And if we have the wish and the courage, well, will there be something to talk over then? Well, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think there's something to say about Van Gogh's life? Well, I mean, you have books like this, entire books dedicated just to the letters that they wrote to one another, right? Can you see that? Yeri's actually speculating, is saying, at the end of our lives, do you think there'll be anything to say about our lives? Well said, Yvonne, well said. By the way, if there's anyone new here, Yvonne's also an artist. I wonder, where is Iceland here? Yeah, there definitely is. Okay. It says we can try two things: make some good things ourselves and collect and do business with what things of others we admire. But we must both live somewhat more vigorously, and perhaps joining hands is a step towards this. Quite it's quite affirming, right? He's not feeling very well. He's talking about collaborating with his brother, and his brother seems to see it that way as well. And he's saying we must live vigorously, and that's what this channel's all about. Team Petrie is about let's live vigorously. Let's live with rather more energy than less energy. Let's make some good things of ourselves. And this is really important to understand in terms of Vincent van Gogh. Is it's not only about him becoming an artist. It's also about him and his brother trying to establish other artists. So in other words, it's also about them getting other artists successful and making money out of that. And that's where Paul Gogh comes into it. That's where Dr. Gachet comes into it. It's not just about Van Gogh and his interests and what's going on with him. It's also about Theo's. It's also about Theo, his career as an art dealer. And so it's important that they preserve those relationships. And that is why people don't understand the intrigue with Paul Gogh. They don't understand the intrigue with Dr. Gachet. They think the story is just Vincent. It's not. Josie, see you a bit later. Thanks for joining us. Fiona says, my sister's an artist too. Fiona, my brother's also an artist, and also my aunt is an artist. Anyway, so he says, but now allow me to touch on a delicate question. If I've said some unpleasant things about our upbringing and our home, this has been because of finding each other and understanding each other in business. When working together, we are on a ground where there must be criticism. So saying in terms of work, we maybe need to disagree. Now I can perfectly understand that one can love a thing or a person passionately and cannot help it. All right, I will not butt in, only so far as it might make a fatal separation between us where unity is necessary. Now, I actually think he's talking about Joe Bonga here. I actually think here he's actually talking about, so when he talks about, I want to touch on a delicate question, I think it's this idea that I'm going to move in with you, kind of, and your girlfriend. Bear in mind, in that time they didn't like live together the way they do today. But I think he's aware that Theo has a girlfriend, and he's kind of saying, I won't butt in, but you know what? Maybe you should break up with her, or maybe you should just be aware that she may lead to a fatal separation between us, where unity is necessary. Don't you get that sense that's what they're talking about? Jeanne says, I had to sit for my mother. It was painful. What does Carol say? Oh, okay, cool. No, we didn't just read that letter. So he says, well, I'm not quite sure where you are in listening to this. Anyway, he says, our education will not prove to have been so good that we will keep many illusions about it. And perhaps we would have been happier with another education. I think that's an oblique reference to Christianity. He says, but if we keep to the positive fact of wanting to produce and to be something, then we can talk over accomplished facts. When it cannot be avoided without getting angry, even if they might concern or stand in direct relation with the Goupils or our family. Besides, these questions are between you and me, and for a better understanding of the situation and not out of spite. Again, this is him being forthright with his brother. He's very authentic, he's very honest. If we undertake something, it will be no unimportant thing for either of us to improve our health, because we shall need a long life, at least 25 or 30 years of incessant work. So that is what he predicts for himself, that he expects to work for 30 years, and he ends up working for about 6 times less, he works less than 10 years. So about a third as long as he expected to. The present time is so interesting if one considers that it is possible we shall witness the beginning of the end of a society. Again, just incredible Woods for the Trees perspective is saying, the time we're living in is incredible. And this is the time that is about to give birth to the Eiffel Tower. Engineering is coming online. Medicine is coming online. Um, Vaccines, dentistry, the rabies vaccine, all of that. The Model T Ford, they're about to have cars and electricity and the first human flights. So I want to see, when was the first human flight? Not that one. Human powered flight, I guess. No, it's not what I'm looking for. Let's just look for Wright brothers. That was 1903. So he's what, almost 20 odd years shy of that. Yeah, about 20 years shy of the first flight by the Wright brothers, right? Sustained flight of a heavier than air aircraft. So it is an exciting time. People are inventing things. He says there's infinite poetry in autumn or in the sunset. One feels a mysterious aspiration in nature, so it is now. He's saying there's some kind of infinite poetry going on in the world right now, in society. He says in art there's decadence, if you like, after Delacroix, Mallet, Breton, and so on, Daubigny, but a decadence so full of charm that you can still expect enormously beautiful things, and they are made every day. Just think of how decadent but also beautiful the Eiffel Tower is. I am longing terribly for the Louvre, the Luxembourg, etc., where everything will be new to me. All my life I shall regret not having seen the Saint Chefs d'oeuvre, the Delacroix exhibition, and the Meissonier exhibition, but there are other things left. It's true that I may have made less progress through wanting to get on here too quickly, but what shall I say? One of the reasons was my health, and if I get that back, as I hope, my work here will prove to have been less unfruitful. So I don't know what you guys think, but I find these letters pretty incredible, pretty insightful. Am I right that if one asks permission, one may draw from the plaster cast in the Louvre if one is not at the École des Beaux-Arts? It would not surprise me if once having got used to the idea of living together, you will think it stranger and stranger that for fully 10 years we have been so little together. So again, the idea of living together. Well, I certainly hope that this will be the end of it and it will not begin again. He's talking about his illness. The apartment which you mentioned is perhaps rather expensive. I should like a somewhat cheaper one just as well. I wonder how those few months in Union will be. I still have some furniture there, and as the country there is very beautiful and I know the neighborhood pretty well, it would perhaps be a good thing to keep a pied-à-terre there in some inn where I could leave the furniture, as otherwise. So all of this is talking about potentially moving. The best things are sometimes made when one comes back to old spots. I must finish this as I must go to the club. Think over what would be the best thing to do. Still 32 years old at the time that this is written. So we're still stuck in the first half of February. Alas, I'm not going to be able to get us to Paris in this episode either. That there's Paris, 1st of March. I'm not going to, I just definitely am not going to be able to get there. There are a heck of a lot of letters written in February. Shall we do one more letter, then we'll end there. Can't believe we're still in the prelude to Paris. Okay. Dear Theo, I received your letter enclosed. Sorry, it's the next letter. Dear Theo, I must write once again, for the sooner we make up our minds, the better. As to a studio we can find in one, and if we can find in one and the same house a room with an alcove and also a garret or corner of an attic, then you could have that room and alcove. And we could make ourselves as comfortable as can be. During the daytime, the room might serve as a studio, and the garret would serve for various more or less unsightly implements and for dirty work. Besides, I could sleep there and you in the alcove of the studio. Such an arrangement, so even his brother is also used to toughing it out, right? Such an arrangement or something similar would be perfectly satisfactory for the first year, I think. What I'm not sure of is whether we shall get on personally, though I don't despair of it, but it will be much more comfortable for you to come home in the evening to a studio than to an ordinary room, which is also always more or less dreary. And that dreariness is our worst enemy. It's quite an interesting turn of phrase there. Dreariness is our worst enemy. Could be the mantra of this channel. Okay. As the doctor tells me that I must improve my physical way of living, who knows but what you also would feel better for such a measure. For you two are neither happy nor in sufficiently good spirits. Let's call things by their names. You have too many cares and too little prosperity. But perhaps the fault is in ourselves, because we are both too isolated and because our forces and resources are too much divided and therefore insufficient. So union is strength. That would be much better. So again, if you want to jump out of this and go into the old true crime thing, and you say, well, yes, someone who's socially awkward and he doesn't have girlfriends or is an incel or whatever, is isolated by his own admission. Why does he not become Koberger? Why does he not become Brian Laundrie? Why does he? And besides the reasons I've already given, the fact that he's so self-possessed that he's got a strong sense of his identity, he also does have an ally in his brother. There's at least one person that cares about him and he cares about someone. That is enough glue to keep someone on the right track in terms of their lives. Just loving one person or having the love of one person, all things being equal in the sense of dysfunctional, that's enough to keep someone happy, right? That's enough. Robbie says, I'll get the rest tomorrow. I have to sleep. I also need to sleep. I'll get going in probably the next 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. Hope you sleep well, Robbie. So let's do this. So I think there must be more animation. We must throw all doubts overboard and also a certain lack of confidence. Do you want a motive for keeping one's serenity even when one is isolated and misunderstood and has lost all chance for material happiness? Do you want a motive for keeping one's serenity? Well, it says one thing remains: faith. One feels instinctively that an enormous number of things are changing and that everything will change. He's right. Things are changing. The world is changing. His art is about to change the world. He feels that, and he's actually part of that as well. It's quite extraordinary. We are living in the last quarter of a century that will end again in a tremendous revolution. Well, he is about to revolutionize art. Rick says, I really enjoy his live streams, learn everything new. Cool. Thanks, Rick. But suppose both of us see its beginning at the end of our lives. We certainly shall not live to see the better times of pure air and the rejuvenation of all society after those big storms. Using kind of a similar turn of phrase as Waters, who's talking about the storm, the gathering storm in Murdo's life, right? So Van Gogh is saying, I predict storms in our lives, and he's right about that. I think maybe he just didn't realize how soon they were to come upon them. He says, it is already something not to be duped by the falsity of one's time, and to send the so can you believe it is talking about not being duped by the falsity of one's time. Doesn't that apply so much today as well? Try not to be duped by fake news and fake people on YouTube. Try and be authentic. Try not to be distracted by all the noise and the nonsense. Look what happens when you aren't. Look what you can create when you are not distracted by fake things. You can produce something worthwhile, right? And he says, we are still in the closeness, but the following generations will be able to breathe more freely. Zola and the de Goncourt believe in it with the simplicity of grown-up children. And bear in mind, he's saying what he's saying prior to World War II, right? And one, prior to 2 world wars. He says, and the very ones you have mentioned too, Turgenev and Daudet, they do not work without an aim of or without looking ahead. So again, what was missing with Brian Laundrie and Brian Koberger? I think they were pretty aimless. They may have had a basic idea of what they wanted to do, but they weren't caught up. They didn't have a sense of mission. They didn't have enough sense of purpose for their lives. He says, but all avoid, and with reason, prophesying utopias, and are pessimistic in that if one begins to analyze the history of this country shows terribly clearly how revolutions may come to nothing, though they begin ever so nobly. Now, the same thing you might say with Murdoch. Didn't surely he had a purpose? Well, taking drugs confuses your purpose. I don't think you can say an addiction is a purpose. It's purposeful purposelessness, I guess. You see the thing he says, you see the thing that supports one is that one doesn't always have to be alone with one's feelings and thoughts when one works and thinks together with other people. So he's saying to his brother, you know what, I don't need to really be alone. He's really making the case for them to move in together. Is pitching his he likes the idea. Well, I'm going to be in Paris. At the same time, that increases one's strength and one is infinitely happier. Now I wanted it to be this way between us for a long time already, and I imagine if you stayed alone, you would get depressed because times are not cheerful unless one finds satisfaction in one's work. There's another reason and another proof of the antidote to depression that worked in Van Gogh's life. He says, you would get depressed if you didn't find satisfaction in your work. Well, didn't he find satisfaction in his work? If anything, he was finding the most satisfaction in his work in the last months of his life. So how does he then get depressed and wants to commit suicide? You see, this doesn't make sense. And we're getting this from his own words, right? I'm sending you that novel by de Goncourt, especially for the preface. Have I read through this? Well, I've done that before, but he says, I've not been at all happy in the sense in which I desired it formerly. Well, it may come sooner or later, but for you too, there will come a moment when you know for sure that all chance of material happiness is lost, fatally and irrevocably. I feel sure of it, but remember that at the same moment, there will be a certain compensation in feeling the power to work within oneself. So there you have it really explicitly. He's saying, you know what? You could lose your material possessions. You could end up being poor. You could, struggle in a really fatal and irrevocable way. But you know what? you know what makes up for that? You know what makes up for that sort of catastrophe is that you can feel inside yourself the power to work within yourself. And so all of life's noises and nonsense is kind of water off a duck's back. Is saying, I found something meaningful to do with my life, and that's all that matters. Money doesn't matter. Food doesn't matter. The food I'm getting is out of the work that I'm doing, and it excites me and makes me happy. Isn't that an extraordinary statement? That the power to work within oneself compensates for any loss of money or possessions. What I have inside of me lasts, matters, right? These are Team Peachtree sentiments. What cuts me to the heart is the beautiful serenity of the great thinkers of the present, as, for instance, that last walk of the two of the Goncourts, of which you will read in the description. The last days of the old Turgenev were the same way too. He was with Daudet a great deal then, sensitive, delicate, intelligent like women. He's describing men that are intelligent like women, men that are sensitive and delicate like women, sensitive to their own suffering, and yet always full of life and consciousness of themselves. No indifferent stoicism, no contempt for life. And all of that stuff is the stuff of true crime, right? Being stoic, being indifferent, having contempt for life, that is the substance in which crimes take place, contempt in particular. I repeat, those fellows, they die the way women die. No fixed idea about God, no abstractions, always on the firm ground of life itself. In other words, he's saying they realists, and they're only attached to that. They're only attached to the firm ground of life itself. Quite extraordinary letters, these. I must say, it really is deep stuff. It really is meaningful stuff. He says, I repeat, like women who have loved much, hurt by life, and as Sylvester says of Delacroix, well, we've got to find out what this means. I don't know what that is. It means, so he died almost smiling. Okay. Okay. Meanwhile, we are not yet that far. On the contrary, we have to work first, to live first, although without happiness in the ordinary sense of the word. Again, and I've said this so many times, he's prepared to do the work. He's prepared to suffer. He's prepared to have the difficulty. He's happy and fulfilled with his work, with his life, with his life's work. But whatever there may be of the future, you may be sure that I shall be very glad if I can work a year at Corman's, unless there's a better opportunity for drawing at the École des Beaux-Arts or some other studio that I've heard mentioned here. The ancients will not prevent us from being realistic. On the contrary. So, such interesting turn of phrase, really. Of course, I'm also longing enormously for the French pictures. By the way, don't you like this little poem? And it translates to, all evil has come from woman, obscured reason, appetite for lucre, treachery, golden cups in which the wine is mixed with lees. Every crime, every happy lie, every folly comes from her. Yet adore her as the gods made her, and it is still the best thing they did. Pretty incredible, right? it's speaking about the contradiction of life, the contradiction of love, the fact that with life there's death, with love there's pain and heartache, with art there's struggle for the art to um, uh, come to the surface, for it to be recognized. After all, painting is the secret of being able to give one a second youth. Tell me, have you ever read anything by Carlyle? Perhaps it is not even necessary if you only see the face of that man and know that his work is something like Michelet's. Whistler and Legros have both painted his portrait. I think Whistler is an American artist, right? Whistler painted Whistler's mother. He's also one who dared a great deal and had a different insight into things than the rest. That is really the bottom line for who Van Gogh wants to be. He wants to dare a great deal, and he does. And he does have he wants a different insight into things, and he does. He achieves a different way of looking at things. He wants to contribute something to the human condition, and he does. I feel the same way. I've also dared a great deal. I'm continuing to dare a great deal. And I've also got a different insight into things. And that leads to that authentic approach leads to peaches on the beach tree, right? It leads to meaning that helps humanity, but also helps the person that is finding it, right? Always when I study the lives of such men, I find the same story: lack of money, bad health, opposition, isolation. In short, trouble from beginning to end. So he's saying, you know what? People who contribute to the world, contribute to society, struggle. They don't have money. They have bad health. Right now, my health's not terribly good. Certainly my fitness. If I look at my brother, he did a triathlon the other day. He's the picture of health. Anyway, lack of money, bad health, opposition, criticism, isolation. You don't really get credit from those around you. In short, trouble from beginning to end. Muntz's article on Paul Baudry was very good, and I like this especially. He has worked at the renewal of the smile. Could one say of Delacroix something about passion? See what that means. We need some French speakers here. He worked on the renewal of passion. He worked on the renewal of passion. So that is in a nutshell what this channel is also about. It's about getting you to smile again in a genuine way. It's not just smiling for the camera, getting that smile that is inside of you, smiling about good things, to come back to the surface, a genuine smile to be renewed, right? And on top of that, beyond the smile, a renewal of passion, a renewal of things like energy, a renewal of inspiration, all of those kind of things. And that's the mythos of this channel, is to bring back some of those things in different ways. Like I said, I want to put up a video of me saving a spider, and I mean it's a scary thing, and in a way you don't want to do it, but it's meaningful activity, and after you've done it, you actually feel something. You've done something that you don't really get any benefit out of. In fact, you put yourself out to some extent, but you feel renewed. There's renewal in that sort of silly little activity. And what are other activities like that? Anyway, so he says, at all events, write soon. Goodbye. Ever yours, Vincent. I would love to continue with these letters. They're really fantastic. These are again some of the best letters I think he's written. I would love to continue, but I've got to find a pillow. I don't want to be doing this until the sun comes up. So I'm going to be saying cheers to you guys. I just want to remind you of what I said earlier. I took this photo that's behind me. I took it in a store that sells light covers and bulbs and so on. And I wasn't really aware that, I mean, I wasn't, I guess I wasn't that conscious that, you know, when you put a light into a lamp or whatever, that I'm not talking about one light into one lamp, I'm talking about into lots of lamps. Some light casts a cold light and some light casts a warm light. And think about yourself in the way you're thinking about things and the way you know, if you think about um, how the prosecutor today in that case was trying to convey something to the jury. He's trying to convey all those little details. And you can understand that he wants to and he needs to. But the advice I would have given him as a narrator is I would have said, cast a warm light. In other words, warm the jury with your story. Give them a sense of what you're talking about, something that warms them, right? um, and figure out what that means. If you don't know what that means, figure out what that means. And I'm sorry that we didn't see the word greed, and I'm sorry that he didn't connect the boat incident in a way like these documentaries did, where you see that light and that whatever happened to Mallory Beach, I think, is being dealt with now, right? And you may not have that much of a connection to the story, but maybe you would with Mallory Beach. She didn't deserve to die, right? And anyway, in whatever way you do it, make sure that the light you are shining, the information you're sharing, is meaningful, that it reaches the other person. And that's in terms of that case. In terms of you, in terms of me, make sure that your light, you're not just got a piece of paper and you are ticking off all the little things. You know, you can do that, but you will then never enjoy this sort of thing at the end of it, right? So if you want to have this experience in your life, be a warm light person, not a tick box person, right? And I'm not saying sometimes you do need to tick off a couple of boxes, like Van Gogh needs to go to Paris and he needs to do that and that. But in general, see the woods and see the woods as um, trying to be a warm light person rather than a cold light person. Also trying to think of your own life in a warm light, not a cold light. I don't mean be sentimental about it, but what I mean is, how can I put it? You want to be realistic, but nevertheless have something that is to some extent edifying at the end of it. Otherwise, you're making a legal argument that might be 100% true, but it doesn't touch you, it doesn't reach you. You might be making art that is like a photographic portrait of something, but it doesn't say anything. And that is what you want to say, and you must be aware what you want to say, right? And so if we come back to this weaver, right? If we come back to this weaver, look how he seems to be in the warm light of day. And he's got so much energy. He's constantly, passionately doing his thing. He's weaving, right? And everywhere he goes, he's weaving a warm light together in a way. He's part of that. He is that, but he's also creating that. Even if it's raining, you kind of get a sense of his indomitable spirit, right? So what I must say I got out of this weaver, the fact that this little bird has been expending huge amounts of energy, is built, I don't know what it is now, 12, 13 nests. If you are ever disappointed, if you ever feel life's not fair, and you think about this little bird and you think about Vincent van Gogh, it isn't fair. It's not supposed to be fair. You're not supposed to compare your life to somebody else, right? As soon as you realize that the lot of this weaver bird is completely natural and normal, then it takes all of that pressure off yourself to say, you know what, things shouldn't be like this. Where you say, you know what, it's not really such a big deal. If a little bird can make 12 nests and pull them to pieces, I can do X, Y, Z, right? It's not the end of the world. I'll try again, just like Van Gogh did. I'll try again. Even if I never succeed, it's still worth it. And that's the most important belief to hold together. Your passion means something, right? You're alive in order to feel that life is worth living. You're not alive to feel like life isn't worth living. You're not alive to think that um, all day, every day, that this is why a criminal thought that and they were right to commit murder. You are here to say why it's right to want to live and why it's right to want to um, appreciate other people's right to life as well, and insects and birds and everything else, right? So that's my story. I'll be back in a couple of days because I really want us to get to Paris with Vincent van Gogh. So I hope you enjoyed this live. A little bit longer than I thought it would be, but really was, I found, very worthwhile. It's just, yeah, life is about trying. Life's not really, it's not like whether you succeeded or failed. It might seem like that is what it's about, but it's actually about your attitude in spite of success and in spite of failure. Can you keep your head no matter, like when all others are losing theirs, but also when everyone thinks things are a certain way, it might be a good thought, but it's actually not that way. Not supposed to be fair. Thanks, Yvonne. Yvonne, I hope you're going to paint a weave at some point. They're such beautiful birds, right? Look at that one. There. Look how that ribbon of color goes almost like right through. Anyway. Okay, guys. I hope you found this worthwhile. Take care. Um, sounds good, Bridget. Patience is a virtue. Yeah, Paris or bust. He does sing. He definitely does sing. Weather the storm through thick and thin. That's it. Cool. They're not my words, they're his words. And we've still got quite a few to get through. Thanks a lot for joining me. If you're in the States, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Ciao.